Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman is on assignment. On the show tonight,
this casino is going to have to be on super steroids.
Bally's casino proposal passes a major hurdle in City Council, but not without objection. We break down the vote and what's next.
That's the Dan Ryan on a good day.
According to updated census numbers, Illinois actually grew in population. What's behind the change and what could it mean for the state? After a 7-week slide, the Dow jumps more than 600 points.
It is a concern in the sense that if it were to spread, it's consequential.
Cases of the rare monkeypox are popping up. What health officials are making of these rare cases?
The worst thing in the world is to have to bury your child. That's not the circle of life.
Turning pain into purpose. Our Chicago Tonight special series follows 3 mothers who've lost children to gun violence. As Chicago area stores see record high sales, Amazon is looking to sublet warehouses due to cooling online sales. That and more from Cranes. A pilot project offering free legal representation to non-citizens are now underway in Cook County. And meet a local artist turning discarded materials into art honoring Black history. But first, some of today's top stories. Changes to Chicago's curfew law aren't official yet. 2 of the mayor's allies actually pulled the ordinance in City Council today. Mayor Lori Lightfoot wants Chicago's weekend curfew for unaccompanied minors to start at 10 p.m. instead of 11 for those under 18. Some older people and activists have condemned this method to crack down on the spike in teen violence. The ACLU is considering a lawsuit. Teens spoke out against the changes today at City Hall.
We want to live our lives, but we can't because our lives are so restricted. Shondell Holiday came out that day to have fun, to be with his friends and enjoy the city. Unfortunately, he lost his life, but instead of the city uplifting the youth in our time of need, they punish us and add more restrictions to our lives.
The final vote on the curfew ordinance, however, is set to happen on Wednesday. And we'll have much more on City Council action later in the program. The Sun-Times reports that newly unsealed court records contradict what former House Speaker Mike Madigan has been saying about his involvement in a payment scheme for a political ally. In a 2018 wiretapped phone call, Madigan allegedly was recorded during a conversation where arrangements were being made for secret payments to his former aide, Kevin Quinn, who was ousted in a sexual harassment scandal. Madigan previously denied any involvement in those payments by lobbyists. In the FBI recording, lobbyist and close Madigan confidant Michael McLean tells the former speaker that he had to, quote, put 4 or 5 people together to make 6 monthly payments to Quinn to help him until he found a job. Madigan and McLean have been charged with racketeering, along with 2 others, in a scheme to trade jobs and contracts for favorable legislative results for ComEd. The Chicago Police Department's summer violence plan got an early rollout today. Police Superintendent David Brown says the heightened police activity actually started months ago.
It's been a very well-planned, not only summer, but we began actually starting to implement these plans at the beginning of this year in February, where we saw that the earlier we got our resources out in, number one, the top 55 beats that drive half the violence, as well as, dealing with some of the issues happening in districts that don't normally see increases in violence, that have like the 1st District, the 18th District downtown, and the 9th District. They're on the south side.
And 1 person was killed and 27 were wounded in shootings across the city this weekend. And up next, the latest on Chicago's future casino, so please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Bally's casino proposal passes a major hurdle today. A special City Council committee passed the $1.7 billion proposal 27-3, setting up a final vote on Wednesday. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. And Heather, there's been so much controversy over this proposal to build a casino in River West, which opponents say would reduce property values and snarl traffic and increase crime. Let's listen to Alderman Brendan Riley, who has led the opposition.
The process that we're going through, this sprint to the finish, and the gymnastics we're doing today We gavelled in a city council meeting, we recessed it, we're having a special committee hearing. We're going to be out of this one, go back to city council, so we can make an administrative procedure. So we have to have a vote on this on Wednesday in 48 hours. That is a special circumstance, and in speaking with Chairman Burke, who's been here for 50 years, he's never seen anything like this. So in a way, this is actually worse than the process for the parking meter deal.
Sprinting to the finish line there, Heather, Alderman Riley is especially opposed to the temporary casino plan at the Medina Temple in River North while they build out the permanent casino. Remind us why he's so against it.
Well, the Medina Temple was really a last-minute change because the city decided that it wouldn't work to put the temporary casino on the Tribune printing plant site. And so instead, they're going to use this opportunity to fill that long vacant landmark in River North. The vote was so lopsided, even though it seemed to be up in the air just at the last minute. There was so much back and forth about whether they had the votes that even Alderman Tom Tunney wasn't sure that he was going to even call a vote. But in the end, the alder people voted with the mayor, which is usually what happens in Chicago.
Although, Heather, there had been a lot of opposition here. It seemed like Riley was fomenting significant opposition. Turned out not to be. Is that a surprise that it was such a landslide?
You know, it was to me, but in the end, there was a very compelling argument that the city officials made that this was a seriously once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-generation attempt to bring the Chicago casino. This has been in the works since 1992, and there's no doubt that Mayor Lori Lightfoot will put this at the very center of her expected campaign for re-election as the Chicago mayor who actually got the casino deal done.
And they are really racing through this, Heather. Multiple city council meetings this week to consider this massive proposal. Alderman Riley saying Alderman Burke in his 50 years there has never seen anything like it. How rare is this?
It was truly unprecedented. So the city council met this morning and ran through its normal business, and then the city council meeting was recessed, and all of the alder people were directed to head outside and pick up a file folder full of the most recent changes to the massive casino bill. And when I looked at Alderman Leslie Harriston's handout, the paper was still warm from the copy machine. That's how last minute things were at City Hall today. And, you know, it's going to be, you know, sort of an anticlimactic vote when this actually is all wrapped up, but it was very much in doubt today, despite that lopsided vote.
All right, lots of activity in that copy room there, I'm sure. Heather Sharon, Alderman Burnett, his 27th ward will be home to the permanent casino. He's been a supporter of this plan. Let's have a listen to him.
This deal is going to help us to be able to balance our budget, but also to deal with these pension challenges that we're going to have in the future. And I don't know what else we can do. If we postpone this, are we going to miss the boat and have to come up with something else in order to make these things happen?
Heather, what was the argument that ultimately got those 27 votes on board with this proposal?
Well, nothing concentrates the mind of a politician more than cold, hard cash in an election year. If not for this casino, the city council would be staring down another year of big deficits, and nobody wants to hike property taxes during an election year. And so this casino promises an alternate way to sort of get the city's finances on firmer footing. However, Alderman Brian Hopkins, who was also one of the alder people who voted no today, said he thought it was just pie in the sky and that the numbers weren't going to add up. So this is very much a bet on this casino to help Chicago's financial future.
And it's not as if that money is going to start flowing right away because there's a lot more steps that this plan needs. Explain that.
Well, on Wednesday, the city council will take one final vote, and then it's off to the Illinois Gaming Board, which will have to license Bally's to operate the Chicago casino. Now, Bally's has said they're very confident that will happen because Bally's operates another casino in Illinois, so they are familiar with the process, and they say it should be no sweat.
All right, Heather Sharon, a lot of sweating down there at City Council today and for the rest of this week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
A sigh of relief today as the Dow jumped more than 600 points, rebounding from a 7-week slide that pushed the stock market into bear market territory last week. Consumers still have a lot on their minds, though. Inflation, retirement savings, and record-high gas prices right in time for summer travel. Topping off those concerns are growing fears of a recession. Here to help us make sense of this wildly fluctuating market and economy are David Sequeira, Chief U.S. Market Strategist for Investment Research for Morningstar, Philip Braun, Economist and Professor of Finance at Northwestern University, and Susan Schmidt, Head of U.S. Equities for Aviva Investors. Welcome all of you back to Chicago tonight. Susan, what's the appropriate level of optimism today after this little boom?
Well, the glass is half full, or maybe half empty. I don't think there is an appropriate level because I think investors are going to wake up tomorrow morning and they'll see which way the wind is blowing. It could be totally different. It's a nice time to have an up day, particularly after last week, but I still think there's a lot of volatility ahead and I wouldn't be overly optimistic just yet.
David, you shared that assessment that the volatility has not come to an end all of a sudden because today's good day.
Well, unfortunately, no, I don't think the volatility is over. And in fact, I think over the next couple months, we probably will see a good amount of volatility in the markets. You know, in our 2022 outlook, we noted that there were 4 main headwinds that the markets were going to have to contend with this year. You know, first is just the slowing rate of economic growth in the U.S. Second, you know, the Fed was going to begin tightening monetary policy, which they've started. You know, inflation was expected to run hot, and then we expected interest rates to rise. Now, any one of those headwinds, you know, in and of itself is, you know, difficult for the markets to be able to price in. But unfortunately, we are kind of at a confluence of all 4 right now. And I think the market's going to want to see some additional clarity over the next couple of months to see how those are each going to play out.
Philip Braun, David mentioned those factors here that are dragging the market and the economy, but then on the other side you have retail sales are way up. A new study that we're going to talk about in a bit on the program showed that Chicago saw a boom in retail and restaurant sales last year. Wages are rising, the jobless rate is relatively low. Are there competing factors pulling against the economy right now?
Oh, absolutely. The Federal Reserve and its actions are trying to combat rising inflation. And to do that, they're raising interest rates. And by raising interest rates, we run the risk of slowing the economy down, causing the unemployment rate to rise, causing retail sales to fall, and so on. So it really depends on what the Federal Reserve is going to do in terms of how high they increase interest rates. But to combat inflation, they're going to have to raise them quite a bit, and that could push us into a recession.
It's Susan Schmidt. Do you foresee a recession? I mean, there have been lots of fears out there, and the Fed has a really difficult line to toe here in raising rates, but not cooling off the economy too much.
Well, it is a difficult line to walk, and I think that's why investors are so concerned, and that's why you're seeing so much volatility in the market. So no one has certainty on that view to a recession, but everyone is worried that that might be the outcome. It's going to be a tough balance to manage to get inflation under control, but at the same time, keep our economy going. We're still in recovery post-COVID. Things haven't gotten back to entirely normal just yet, and I think that's important that we still are hoping to achieve normal. Investors are waiting to see which way this goes.
David Sequeira, what do you think? Are fears of a recession warranted?
Yeah, we do think that they are over-warranted at this point. So we're not projecting a near-term recession. In fact, our U.S. economic research team recently updated their projections, and we're looking at 3% of a forecast for real GDP this year and 2.2% next year. So when we're looking at it, we see a lot of, the factors that had caused, the contraction in the first quarter. We think that those are going to be one-time in nature, and that we expect to see, some of the supply disruptions and some of the issues, work themselves out over the next couple of quarters.
Philip Braun, for the folks that say, that ask, how long is inflation going to be around? How long are high gas prices going to be around? What's your message to them?
How long inflation is going to be around is, again, dependent on the Federal Reserve. But most likely, the Fed's not being that aggressive to fight inflation. So it's going to be around a while, right? More than a year, and possibly into 2 years. Whether gasoline prices are going to come down, it's hard to say. Globally, the crude oil prices have flattened out. not rising anymore. So that at least indicates maybe gasoline prices won't continue to rise, but it's not necessarily the case they're going to fall.
Susan Schmidt, what about that? And do you foresee inflation rising at the rate that it has been, or is it leveling off?
Well, I think that's the important distinction, is the rate at which it is rising. And so while we have seen price increases, the rate that those prices are increasing seems to be coming down. And that should continue to happen as the Fed continues to raise interest rates. We're also seeing those supply chain snafus increase costs. And as they push themselves through to the consumer's confidence is dropping in the economy. And so we did see some big retailers report last week where consumer sales weren't as high as expected. I think that is going to pull things back. When people aren't rushing to buy something, they're not paying so much. That also is going to help ease the pressures on inflation. And I think, again, focus on the rate of change. That does seem to appear to be falling.
David Zakara, there's a segment of the population that's highly concerned about cryptocurrency. It had been booming for a long time. It's very volatile, but seems to be in the midst of a prolonged drop right now. Do you think that that's going to keep going, or part of the natural volatility of these new instruments?
You know, we don't officially cover the crypto space, so I don't have any kind of price forecasts or targets, in that area. But I think just based on the nature of what cryptocurrency is in and of itself, and it's still such a young, asset, such a young digital asset working itself out, I do think that will be, a pretty volatile space, for a while to come.
Philip Braun, what do you foresee the Fed doing over the next few months? They have said they are going to continue to raise rates, but might they reconsider given the realities of the economy right now?
I don't think they will. They can't. Inflation's too high for them to back off. And so they're going to have to be continuing raising interest rates through the end of this year and into next year. And it's not clear that the level that they're raising interest rates is enough to combat inflation. And so in the future, they might have to be even more aggressive to bring inflation down.
And Susan Schmidt, what is that going to mean for things like home mortgages and other loans?
Well, as interest rates go up, things get more expensive. So all of those loans are going to get more costly to the consumer. We've already seen that impact the interest in home buying. We've seen that impact the amount of refinancing that's done on existing mortgages. Interest rates are an important determinant of how the economy functions. Increased interest rates puts a dampener on the economy overall, and we're going to see that costs are going up.
Such a delicate balance to walk right now. All right, our thanks to David Zakara, Philip Braun, and Susan Schmidt. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, once a decade, a national census is supposed to get a handle on how many people live in the United States. And the results impact everything from federal funding to how many representatives each state gets in Congress. The results of the latest census have been in for a while, but now new numbers are out. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more on what that means for Illinois. Amanda, it turns out Illinois is not losing population after all. It gained a significant chunk. Explain that to us.
Yeah, Paris, the story had been that Illinois was losing population, that people were leaving Illinois, that the population had dropped. Instead, the U.S. Census Bureau came out with fresh numbers in its post-enumeration survey that show the reverse, that the state actually gained some 250,000 people. I asked Cynthia Buckley, she's a sociologist and demographer at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, also, by the way, a self-described census nerd, to help us put that data into perspective.
We're not looking at huge adjustments. I know the numbers sound big, but remember, as a resident of the United States, you've got over 330 million other people who are trying to take your parking space. It's a crowded sort of place. It's a hard group to enumerate.
She would know. Buckley worked as an enumerator. That's one of the individuals who goes door to door trying to get folks who didn't initially fill out census forms to do so. She says 2020 was a different and a difficult year. It was the first time you could fill out your census form online. There were political fights, concerns about a citizenship question. It did eventually get struck. And, oh wait, a pandemic, which made people even warier than usual to answer when a stranger knocked at the door. But she says a post-census survey that updates numbers, that is normal. regular every 10 years anyway, even when it's a number like the 250,000 Illinois gained in that latest estimate.
A couple of 100,000 people is tough, right? That's the Dan Ryan on a good day. At the same time, what we've got here is the idea that we're the biggest state in the Midwest, right? We've got over 12 million rather, Illinoisans, and therefore adding on this error factor from the post-enumeration survey really is a very minuscule percentage.
Illinois wasn't the only state to see a change. Some 14 states showed swings. The corrections put some states up and others down. Buckley says these provisions are not enough to have reversed Illinois' loss of a congressional seat. Going forward, Illinois will have 17 U.S. reps going to D.C. rather than 18. She also says they likely would not have shifted the shape of the districts in Congress or even really the state house because, well, of course, politicians are drawing those districts and the statistical changes, not really enough to trump the political interests that also determine borders. Now, where things could change, if not influence, well, then money. Members of the Governor J.B. Pritzker's administration were in Washington, D.C. last week when the census made this announcement, and Pritzker's chief of staff says he called right away.
The very first thing out of his mouth was, we need to understand what federal resources or dollars we are not getting because of this undercount. And so we kicked off an immediate effort with our federal partners, members of our congressional delegation, to really start the process of understanding, is there any money we haven't received as a result of this? Are there any grant programs we weren't eligible for?
Ann Capera says she does not yet have answers to those questions, but the expectation is, yes, that Illinois could see additional money, be it for infrastructure, human services, hospitals, because a lot of congressional money goes back to states on a per capita basis. Capera says that it is not yet time for a victory lap, but this is good news.
People do want to live here and move here, work here, go to college here. And I also think it's a rebuke of the naysayers and the pessimists and the folks who've made a career really out of downplaying the state's chances, out of talking down Illinois, out of making it out to be, we had this huge out-migration when in fact, we grew as a state.
But critics say that Illinois has no business boasting, especially considering how it is doing compared with neighboring states in the Midwest.
We are the laggard. And given the crime we have right now, given the highest property taxes in the country, and given some of the strictest COVID mitigations, I think we're going to find that we're going to still have lots of pressure with our population.
Meanwhile, states that saw an increase in their congressional representation, well, they saw their populations soar. Texas by 4 million, Florida by nearly 3 million.
Those states are taking all the people, they're taking all the investment, all the wealth, and a lot of them are coming from here. You look at the IRS data, you look at the census data, people are leaving Illinois, not in small numbers, in droves, and it's across every income group and every age group. So if we want to thrive in Illinois, we need people, we need investment, and if we're getting the opposite, we're in big trouble.
Now, Buckley says that any claim that residents are flocking in or flocking out of Illinois based on any one particular administration or policy, well, she called it balderdash.
The Midwest as a whole is not growing as fast as the Sun Belt. And so unless either the Democrats or the Republicans or the independents can do something about preventing the next polar vortex, I have a real strong suspicion that these claims of we're doing it right, so people are moving in, we're doing it wrong, so people are moving out, are quite overblown.
Now, Buckley, by the way, says that considering, again, that there was a pandemic, overall, the United States did really well. This post-enumeration survey, it's not a mistake. She says that the U.S. carried out the census well, and Chicago and Illinois in particular saw great rates of return on the census, and she says that both the city and state are to be commended for that. These numbers are still relatively fresh, and we don't yet have all of the information that we may be getting from the U.S. Census Bureau. Buckley, however, has a guess on what might be behind some of the growth in states like Illinois. She says that many of them are, she used the term migrant magnets, and she guesses that it may be that you had non-English speakers or migrants who were hesitant to participate in the census, particularly with those citizenship question fears early on. But when you go back around and there's a smaller population, as there is working with in the post-enumeration survey, well, then they're easier to get in touch with and participate. And so she thinks that may be what is behind the surge of population in Illinois. With that, Paris, back to you.
All right, Amanda, small percentage, but still $250,000 gain in population, 250,000 person gain in population sounds better than an 18,000 person loss. All right, thanks very much. And up next, some of today's top business headlines, so please stay with us.
Certainly we can celebrate, but we also have to recognize what so many people have gone through because of racism and what people continue to go through.
I think that Americans are finally beginning to embrace that we are African, we are indigenous, we are European, we are Asian, we are everything.
Chicago area retail stores hit record high sales, but that's not without impacting online buying as Amazon is looking to sublet warehouse space. And legal limbo for nearly 200 pot shop licenses could soon come to an end. Here to go behind the headlines is Crane Chicago business reporter Danny Ecker. Danny, good to see you as always. So first off, some good news for local retail stores and restaurants, which saw record sales last year, according to a local consulting firm. Just how much of a jump in consumer spending are we talking about?
Well, it was the biggest annual increase in retail sales in the Chicago area in more than 40 years, so pretty sizable. Consumers spent almost $153 billion locally last year. That was up 29% from 2020. Obviously, comparing anything to 2020 could reveal some funky-looking stats, but sales dropped only 9% in 2020 compared with 2019, so we're still talking about a pretty big jump. People had stimulus checks coming in and were ready to spend money after they couldn't do a lot of things in 2020. And the forecast for 2022 is actually also up, but a lot of that's having to do with inflation and things costing more because obviously we've seen recent slowdown in some consumer spending.
So those 2021 numbers obviously good for local taxing bodies here, but with good news comes bad news for online spending. That is, it seems to be cooling off, so much so that Amazon is reportedly looking to sublease 10 million square feet of warehouse space to other users. What does that tell us about the state of online shopping right now?
Well, it's a signal of caution, certainly. Amazon leased a remarkable amount of warehouse space to store and distribute goods bought online during the pandemic, as a lot of people rushed to buy things on the internet. A lot of that was built out and leased here in the Chicago area, but the company said recently that the surge in online shopping has slowed a little bit, and so they might have way too much space. This is kind of a hedge by Amazon. It's, for perspective, if they did sublease 10 million square feet, that's only about 5% of their overall footprint. So we're not talking about a massive pullback, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on as we try to gauge whether or not we're heading toward a recession.
And I know they've talked about plans to build more warehouse space in the area. We'll have to see what happens to that. Finally, a long delay in issuing new state retail marijuana licenses might soon come to an end. So what's the latest there?
Yeah, this is a legal process that began in late 2020 when the state initially announced finalists for the first round of cannabis retail licenses. There was a challenge at the time to the criteria the state was using to select those that had a shot, and that led a Cook County judge to block the state from issuing the licenses. Now the attorney that filed that challenge has asked the judge to lift the stay, so it's likely we may get these licenses issued here in the near future, and that would mean a lot of applicants finally getting licenses to sell and open weed shops, and this has slowed some of the growth of Illinois' marijuana industry, so the removal here could help boost some of that tax revenue the state was counting on.
A lot of applicants there waiting to jump into the game. All right, Danny Ecker, thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
And still to come on Chicago Tonight, meet a mother determined to make change in the community where her daughter was killed. Her story is part of our new Chicago Tonight series, Turning Pain into Purpose. What the CDC and other public health officials are saying about the spread of the rare monkeypox disease in the U.S. and beyond. A pilot program offering free legal representation to non-citizen immigrants is underway in Cook County. We hear how it's going so far. And arts correspondent Angel Ito introduces us to a local artist turning discarded materials into art honoring Black history. But first, some more of today's top stories. Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown says homicides are trending down as compared to the same time last year. But over the weekend, a 21-year-old was killed and more than 24 others were wounded in Chicago shootings. 28 people in all, including at least 4 teens, were shot. And looking ahead to the cyclical summer spike in violence, Chicago Police Brass has made changes to how days off are canceled. Chicago Police Department has shifted away from a last-minute decision in an effort to tamp down dissatisfaction and criticism.
We've listened to officers who show concerns about the last-minute notice because of personal scheduling with family. So we've scheduled it further out, given notice further out of these days being canceled, as well as we've rotated so every work group doesn't get canceled all at the same time.
With the Supreme Court's anticipated rollback of Roe v. Wade abortion protections, Illinois Planned Parenthood is expanding access to abortion pills via mail. To qualify, patients must have an Illinois mailing address to send the medication. Patients must meet with a clinician via telehealth to determine whether they qualify. Out-of-state patients can still access the abortion medication via telehealth, but need to travel to Illinois for their video visit and to pick up the prescription in person at a Planned Parenthood health clinic. A new Chicago Tonight series follows 3 grieving mothers whose children have been killed by gun violence. Reporter Joanna Hernandez met with them to learn about their lost loved ones and to hear about the work they're doing to raise awareness. The 3-part series, Turning Pain into Purpose, begins tonight, and Joanna joins us now with more. Joanna.
Now, Paris, I have to tell you, the mothers and families I spoke with are carrying unimaginable pain. Now, we begin our series by sharing the story of one mother who's made it her mission to give back to the community by purchasing the East Chatham store where her daughter was killed.
What's needed in the community.
But you wanted the place where your daughter took her last breath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I went back and forth about it. Certain family members, like, I think it'd be too traumatic, but I think I came up with the final decision, is that's what I'm trying to do.
What was that final decision?
To stay here and fight.
It's been 2 years since Naisha Beeman's daughter was killed inside a convenience store on 79th Street and Avalon Avenue. She says every day that goes by, she wishes she had told her daughter not to go to the convenience store.
I go back and forth. I wish I was like, nope, you can't go. But how? How can I keep telling the 18-year-old, no, you can't go? No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. You know, I couldn't keep telling her no. So she was going to the Shed Aquarium. She wasn't going to a party or lounge. I don't know, you know. She went to the Shed Aquarium.
And she was here with her boyfriend. They came to pick up some snacks.
And that's it. After the Shed Aquarium, I was going to pick her up. So I just, you know, you wonder, did she see it coming? Was she in, did she go instantly?
18-year-old Jaya Beeman had her whole life ahead of her. She was following in her mother's footsteps and studying to become a nurse at Malcolm X College, dreaming of becoming a traveling nurse one day.
I told her I love her every day. I told her I care. Everything I do, I have done because of Jaya, because she was my firstborn. So she was my motivation, my why for everything, why I went so hard, and she still is.
The teenager was killed when 3 people opened fire, shooting into the store on February 2020. 22 bullets were discharged, killing Jaya and injuring 5 others.
Your daughter still hasn't received full justice?
No, she hasn't received full justice. 2 adults that was there.
Two adults that still...
At large.
A 15-year-old has been charged in the shooting. Beeman says the teenager had prior offenses on his record.
Do you feel like the city is failing families, mothers like you?
I think the judicial system is. I mean, I get kicked out of court just for asking simple questions. And even I feel victimized every time I go to court. Sometimes the last 2 court appearances, I didn't even get in court, the Zoom.
And you're the mom.
I'm the mom. I didn't ask to be here. I taught my child right. I taught, her right from wrong.
Tough realities mothers like Beeman are facing when trying to raise children in neighborhoods long plagued with gun violence. In the vicinity where Jaya was killed, more than 200 shootings have been reported so far this year. Citywide, the Chicago Police Department has logged upwards of 800 shooting incidents the past 5 months.
If I leave, if I run, if I go, who's going to bring awareness to our problem? Who's going to bring awareness to the terrorism on the south side of Chicago? Because we're plagued with domestic terrorism.
This mother of 4 has since turned her pain into purpose, starting the Jaya Beeman Foundation, an organization she says is dedicated to helping steer young adults away from violence. She has been working to buy the property where her daughter was killed.
I want to turn it into a hub for the foundation, add an extension on it, make it a little bigger, and offer the classes, the warrior mom support groups, the grief counseling, the peer support groups, peer counseling, so we can know what the peers need.
The hurdle now is getting the money to buy the property. The owner wants $159,000 in cash.
I bought the taxes on 2 right here, and I want this house with the X on it for a group home.
While she works to find help to purchase the convenience store, Beeman is buying properties through the Cook County Tax Scavenger Sale, where buyers make cash bids on properties that have more than 3 years of unpaid taxes. Her plan is to turn empty lots into resource gardens for the community. Actions, she says, are meant to create positive change.
I just worry, am I doing what she wants me to do? So I talked to my kids and they said, yeah.
Despite the days, weeks, and years that have gone by without her daughter, Beeman says the pain and trauma never leave.
This is my healing process. I will never be healed. This is my, not healing, let's just say coping. That's how I'm coping.
You feel like instead of, this is your work now.
It's my work now. I'm not angry. I don't want to be mad. I don't want to blame the police. I don't want to blame the judicial system. I want to just be a part of the change.
And Jaya Beeman would have turned 20 this year.
Joanna, she's carrying around so much grief, and you've talked to some other mothers of victims of gun violence. What can we expect from future stories?
So, Paris, in the next 2 stories, you'll hear from a mother who lost 2 sons within a year, and another mother struggling to hold her family together as they all work together to bring justice to their sons' cases.
All right, Joanna, we will look forward to those stories. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cases of a rare disease known as monkeypox have been reported worldwide, including in the U.S. As of Saturday, the World Health Organization reported 92 confirmed cases and 28 suspected cases in 12 different countries, most in Europe. But President Joe Biden says the threat of disease doesn't rise to the same level as COVID.
We've had this monkeypox in the larger numbers in the past, number one. Number two, we have vaccines to take care of it. Number three, there is, thus far, there doesn't seem to be a need for any kind of extra effort beyond what's going on. And so I just don't think it rises to the level of the kind of concern that existed with COVID-19.
And joining us to explain the disease and how it works is Dr. Aniruddha Hazra, an infectious disease specialist at U Chicago Medicine. Dr. Hazra, thank you for being here. First off, a primer, what is monkeypox and how does it spread?
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. So monkeypox is a type of pox virus or orthopox virus. It's in the same family as cowpox or smallpox. It actually is not new at all. It was first discovered back in the 1950s and has been sort of well documented as an endemic in parts of West and Central Africa. The primary way of transmission for monkeypox is actual contact with the pox or the lesions on the skin itself, but can also be spread through contact with saliva, respiratory secretions, and droplets as well.
And you mentioned it's been endemic in African countries for many years. As I understand, this is the largest outbreak in places like Europe and the United States. You heard President Biden downplay it a little bit. How concerned should people be?
Yeah, again, this is not the first outbreak of monkeypox outside the endemic city of Africa. The Midwest and Michigan and parts of Illinois had a monkeypox outbreak back in 2003 with almost 100 or so cases and 0 fatalities. And so I don't think it's downplaying, I think just understanding the virus itself. This is different, I think, than SARS-CoV-2, which is a relatively new virus for all of us and completely novel to how it impacted humans. We have a lot of data to show how this virus impacts not only humans, but also transmission and how transmission continues in humans.
You mentioned it obviously related to smallpox. How serious could it be in humans?
Yeah, so the primary symptoms of monkeypox itself is lesions, a skin rash, which can develop into almost pustular or pus-like lesions, and associated with some fevers. In terms of severe sequelae is typically very rare with any monkeypox or this type of pox virus itself. So it's really more of these skin manifestations, with or without fever, is the biggest sort of impact on humans.
So what do we know about the outbreaks in Europe and the United States at this point?
Yeah, to date, we have almost over 170 sort of new cases across sort of several countries, which is highly unusual for other types of monkeypox outbreaks that we've seen in the past. Typically, those tend to be specific clusters in one country or just in neighboring countries. What we've seen, or what the WHO seems to show, is that a lot of these clusters or outbreaks are actually, associated with certain types of festivals or raves or types of events, and also that there's close contact and intimate contact, potentially even sexual contact, that is potentially helping with the spread of or the transmission of the pox virus.
So you mentioned those cases in Europe tied to events like raves that took place in places like Spain or Portugal. Is that the case for some of the U.S. cases we're seeing?
Yeah, so the cases in Canada can be linked to something similar, and I believe the case in Boston was able to be linked to the cases in Montreal. I know that as far as the case in New York and Florida, which are, I think, the other two potential cases in the United States, it's still not clear what that chain of transmission is just yet.
So it's clear that this does not spread with the same rapidity that SARS-CoV-2 does, correct?
I think it's safe to say that we have a lot of information from past experiences with monkeypox outbreaks, and while it can definitely be transmitted through, again, respiratory droplets and can even be considered airborne, that's not really the primary means of transmission, and really the primary, most effective means of transmission for the monkeypox virus is really direct contact with lesions or these sort of pus-like lesions.
And the president also mentioned that there are smallpox vaccines that are primed to take care of this. There are other viral treatments. Tell us about some of those treatments.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, smallpox is in the same pox family as monkeypox, and so the smallpox virus has been shown to be effective in preventing monkeypox. The United States stopped widespread smallpox vaccination in around 1972, so if you were born before 1972, more likely than not, you've received a smallpox vaccine, which should really protect you against monkeypox itself. We do have our own national stockpile of smallpox vaccines, both the old pox vaccines and the newer ones that were created just in 2019 or so. And so it's great to know that the federal government is looking into making sure that this become available to folks who need it.
And Dr. Hauser, as I understand, there was an outbreak in Wisconsin in 2003. What have epidemiologists learned from that?
Yeah, so that was an interesting outbreak. It was through the sale of actually guinea pigs that were in close contact with Gambian rats when they were being stored. And so it was actually on transmission from the Gambian rats to the guinea pigs, which were then sold at sort of fairs and playgrounds in the Midwest. And so, again, what we learned was, again, it's a centralized cluster with a direct link to West Africa with limited human-to-human spread, at least in that regard. Again, however, almost 100 cases, if not more, out of that outbreak and 0 fatalities, which again gives you an idea of potentially the severity and what to expect with these outbreaks outside Central and West Africa.
So fatality rate, hopefully, potentially very, very, very low, if non-existent, hopefully. Dr. Hauser, what about testing? How do people go about testing for this?
Yeah, so the testing is still through CDC. It's through the genetic testing, nucleic acid testing. And so in the city of Chicago, most academic healthcare systems, as well as most sexual health clinics, have already been briefed by Chicago Department of Public Health and the Illinois Department of Public Health of how to not only obtain the test, but run the test themselves. And so these will be sent over to the CDC. The test itself is a swab of the lesion itself on the skin, and which is, again, sent for PCR testing.
All right, Dr. Hazra, a lot to look for. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me.
And up next, details of a pilot project offering free legal representation to non-citizens in a conversation that first aired on Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices. But first, we take a look at the weather.
When Governor J.B. Pritzker signed the Defenders for All Act in August 2021, it was the culmination of a years-long fight by advocacy organizations to provide access to free legal representation in deportation proceedings to non-citizens. The act took effect at the beginning of this year, and since then, the Cook County Public Defender's Immigration Unit says it's taken on over a dozen cases free of charge, the largest county in the nation to do so. Joining us now with more are Guadalupe Perez, immigration attorney with the Cook County Public Defender's Immigration Unit pilot, and Edith Rendon, Vice President of Immigrant Justice at the Resurrection Project. And thank you both for joining us. And first of all, Edith Rendon, why was this step necessary in the first place?
Yeah, so, well, several things are happening, right? Immigrants continue to be put in process of deportation. About 70% of immigrants don't have attorneys when they're going through this. And so what that's resulting in is we're really not protecting the due process that immigrants have. Immigrants have the right to counsel, and we do believe that not having the funds to be able to pay $10,000, $15,000 for a private attorney should not keep people from having, adequate and ethical legal representation.
And Guadalupe Perez, walk us through this. How does it work?
Well, right now we have several parameters for determining which cases to take. We're still a pilot unit and have three attorneys in our office and one paralegal. So if a person does not have the resources to pay for an attorney, we can consider their case. If they are detained by immigration and they have any Cook County ties, we will consider their case. If they are not detained by immigration, if they have been a client or are a current client of the Cook County Public Defender's Office.
And let me stick with you for a second, Ms. Perez. You say you alluded to the number of cases that you're handling. How would you describe the degree of need, the demand for it?
There's still a large unmet need. We've started collaborating with the Midwest Immigrant Defenders Alliance in order to increase our capacity. This is a new initiative as well in which several legal aid organizations go into court once a week to observe hearings. And if anyone is unrepresented and it's their first master calendar hearing, then we can consider taking on their case as part of this coalition as well.
And Edith and Don, for those people who are before a deportation court, how are they disadvantaged if they do not have legal representation?
Yeah, so there's a lot of data out there that shows that, for instance, only 5% of all folks who are unrepresented win their immigration case. So we know that representation goes a long way in assuring that if somebody has the option to be able to stay. Maybe they're married to a U.S. citizen. Maybe their child is a U.S. citizen and they're eligible for cancellation. Perhaps they have a claim for a U visa because they've been themselves a victim of a crime in the past. You really need an attorney to be able to navigate that, to tell you about your rights, to tell you about what you can apply for, and then to be actively putting in those petitions. Additionally, there is a need for folks to know what their options are, to guide them through the process. So even if you are going to be, perhaps you're a case in which the individual will be deported, you still want to know, what the process is, what to expect. This is, a life-changing situation and folks are detained. And so knowing how long you may be detained, all of that affects both the individual as well as their family.
Ms. Perez, give me an example of a case you're handling right now. Just pull one out of the hat and give us an idea of what this person is going through.
Well, we're seeing a lot of primary breadwinners, head of households. And we first identify to see if the person is eligible for bond. So we've been doing a lot of bond cases, and bond is really important because that allows an individual to pay this immigration bond and to be reunited with their family while still undergoing the immigration proceedings. And then they can continue to work, live in the United States, and they don't have to endure family separation.
I see. And last question for you, Edith Rendon. How will you determine whether or not this, what is now a pilot program, how will you determine if it's worked?
Well, protecting due process is our first priority. So the fact that folks that didn't have an attorney now do is showing us that it worked. I think what's more important for us is, making sure that we continuously advocate. The Defenders for All Coalition will continuously make sure that we're always increasing the budget to make sure that there's more attorneys to be able to meet the demand. And we'll be relying on our champions like Commissioner Alma Anaya, Commissioner Brandon Johnson, to make sure that they're always advocating for these services in the county.
And that's where I have to leave it. Our thanks to Guadalupe Perez and Ere Rendon. Back with more Chicago Tonight right after this.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/Daily Briefing and sign up.
What it was, what it is, and what it shall be. That's how artist Nick Cave describes his three-part exhibition on display at the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago as he works to reclaim identity with help from discarded objects. Arts correspondent Angel Ito takes us to Four Other More.
It's a full circle moment, literally, for Nick Cave as he takes a look back at his career in full in a new exhibit at the MCA titled Four Other More.
You'll see tondos, a series of sound suits, old as well as most current ones that are really sort of based on George Floyd. And then you'll see a number of other sculptural sort of works throughout the show.
It's in repurposed objects of all types that Cave works to acknowledge and celebrate the new life he's found and the objects that were once discarded. This comes after decades of traveling as an emerging artist, creating art with nothing more than what surrounded him.
Materials also provides a way in for a lot of the audience, that there's something that you are going to be able to relate to that's familiar.
But reclaiming discarded objects is not the only narrative Cave works to address.
For decades have been trying to bring light to the subject of racism, inequality, and justice. And at the same time, I have to sort of resolve that within myself. Every time something happens, I've got to resolve it. Otherwise, it could destroy me. I'm sort of interested in, shifting the narrative and sort of owning our history, owning our past, and being resilient in that sort of process. And how do you sort of like psychologically work through manipulative sort of ways of calculating how we sort of exist and saying no to that? And so it's my way of sort of recognizing and putting it in your face, but at the same time, elevating it and empowering it.
No matter the medium, Cave says he hopes his work serves as a vehicle for change as he continues what he describes as his civic responsibility to speak for the voices that are not heard.
I want to sort of take you on this journey. I want there to be moments of silence. I want there to be moments of stillness. And I want you to find ways in which you feel that you can come to the work and be open to something that is unfamiliar, that looks different. And how do we sort of step up to that?
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
For Other More is on display at the MCA until October 2nd. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. The latest on Ukraine, Taiwan, abortion rights, and much more with Illinois members of Congress. Plus, immerse yourself in the thriving creativity of Native American people in a long-awaited show at the Field Museum. And tonight at 8 p.m., join reporter Joanna Hernandez for our next Chicago Tonight Latino Voices virtual community conversation. We'll talk about community investment in youth as summer approaches. To RSVP, visit WTTW.com/events. Again, that's coming up in just a few minutes, right at the top of the hour at 8 p.m. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.
Good grief, Nelly.
Antiques Roadshow, next on WTTW.
Next time on the Great Chicago Quiz Show. How's it going? Well, I hope you don't get hit by the happy bus.
Yes, I will not.
Hope I don't lead you down the wrong path.
Scott, I am amazed.
I do what I can, Jeffrey.
In a utopian society, it will be cheeseburgers everywhere.